everyone. Just want to thank Mike Schaefer and the FCM team for putting up this great event and allowing me to speak. So I want to thank Beth from Innovate Pasadena for introducing me to the crew. So I want to talk about the future with blockchain. Pretty sure most of you have heard about cryptocurrency and a little bit about blockchain, and there seems to be a little bit of confusion or mystery around those. And I think there's a lot of focus on the currency space, obviously, simply because there's a lot of drama involved with the price going up and down, right? At some point, Bitcoin's price was, I think, was like $20,000 per Bitcoin for about 20 minutes, and then currently, I believe today is around $6,000 or $7,000. So that kind of dynamic movement, creates a lot of interest. So I've been in the tech industry for about 22 years. I started very young. I had an old Apple IIgs computer, and I used to do gold hacks on the games. If you know what that means, it's you can't beat the game with skill, so you just go in there and you go in the back end, you crash the game, and then you find out where to increase the gold. And then I also changed the hero's name to my name. And then you start tinkering and you learn more and more, and I kind of self-taught programmer. When I was leaving high school, I actually wanted to be a fighter pilot. So, but my high school advisor said that my eyes were too bad. And I said, well, I'm pretty good with computers. Yes, I went to USC and studied computer science, computer engineering. Thank you. Lots of Trojans out there. And then graduated, went to IBM, US Web, all that. I saw a lot of different evolutions of technology with obviously internet and e-commerce and things like that. And so, now kind of seeing blockchain as a parallel to some of the things I saw earlier in 1996, and it is quite interesting. So also, I was former founding CTO of Machinima, which is the largest YouTube or video entertainment company, and it was acquired by Warner Brothers. I've been working with crypto projects, primarily a Bitcoin version that has AML KYC. And AML stands for anti-money laundering, and KYC is know your customer. So the attempt is to be compliant and kind of work nicer with regulations and things like that. And simply because Bitcoin kind of went through several evolutions already in terms of the how people see it. I mean, you probably have heard of Silk Road and the things that happened with Mt. Gox and all that, right? So the industry's kind of moved a lot. I mean, it's 4 years roughly now. So everyone's kind of focusing on trying to see, the next few evolutions of cryptocurrency. I also have worked on a project called Skycoin, which is actually one of the earlier altcoins. Around 2013, as people, Bitcoin was starting to rise, there, with a technology like that, there tends to be differing opinions or things moving faster, slower. So Skycoin is one group that attempted to fix some of the problem at that time with Bitcoin. And their philosophy is to not to be a currency, but to be a way to boot up the next phase of the internet by creating a decentralized networking system. I had prior, actually, digital currency experience. We worked on, in 2004, a kind of a sports gambling simulator, so to speak. It's a social sports betting game, and it had its own economy. And you would actually go to PayPal and deposit your money, and you would get points in the system, and you would create these tournaments. And it wasn't a real gambling platform because it was all for bragging rights, as we used to say it, and but a lot of that has parallels to the cryptocurrency space, and so it's this myself moving into this space seems to be a natural move. 10 years later, I can still get it to run, and it's we try to run it against the current March Madness just for fun. So that's the background. I'm now with the Change Group, and we're in Pasadena. We just moved into Control Collective down the street, and we're here to kind of start working on blockchain. So quickly, like, what's the difference between blockchain and cryptocurrency? what's distributed ledger technology, and what's beyond the ICO, and things like that, right? So cryptocurrency is just an application. It's just the first application in this new technology that people are calling blockchain, so it appeared about the same time, so hence it's kind of almost synonymous. But there's an industry that's starting around blockchain itself that's looking for other applications that hopefully you'll see in a little while. What kind of things that are involved in the blockchain, and then we'll kind of look at what's the future, what's kind of the next thing, where are we at in the blockchain space, and then in the overall kind of perspective of things. So cryptocurrency, as of this morning, there's about 1,559 different coins and tokens, and the total market cap is around 248. I believe it was 260 or something a few weeks ago, so it moves quite a lot. And you see, relatively, the world's total supply of money is regarded to be around 13 trillion, and all the bitcoins are only shy of the valuation of McDonald's, which is around, I believe, 130 billion. As a result, there's a lot of interest in this area. How did it begin? Just for those of you who actually are new to this space, somewhere around 2009, January 12th, a kind of a mysterious individual, Satoshi Nakamoto, released a white paper that explains this potential to create a digital cash system. It's actually a really elegant kind of combination of existing computer science, principles of cryptography, peer-to-peer networking, and a little bit of economics and human incentive involved. I mean, if you've heard of mining, the incentive is to get miners to help create this massive kind of network that secures itself. And out of that, various people decided to kind of create values upon it. Today, most would argue that it's not necessarily a digital currency, because what people are doing is actually holding on to them and waiting for the value to go up. So it's more of an investment type of asset. And henceforth, there's 1,000 other tries to to create crypto and other applications. So what is it, right? The principles are it's decentralized, and it's a public ledger, so it's a record of everything that's happened from the beginning. They call that, you probably have heard of the term, the Genesis block, which is the very first record of this ledger. And usually it's just an evidence that it was created on this date. So I believe when Satoshi launched the first one, the first block, the first transaction had in it a message, which is the title of the financial newspaper. I forgot which one, but you can probably look it up. The other is just peer-to-peer, so it takes away the central authority of kind of the system, so it's no one person can decide how it goes. And I think with currency, obviously that's something that a lot of people are interested in, and it's not just one government or one bank, it's everyone who participates. And then to tie it all together and say, hey, if everybody says I have a version of the truth, what is the truth? Because a liar could or somebody that wants to game the system can say, hey, the truth benefits me. So consensus is really important in systems like this. And consensus, of course, is an old principle of computing in distributed computing to figure out which is the right value of data. Bitcoin and a lot of protocol use what is called a proof of work, which is a cryptographic challenge that is done quickly and uses a lot of computational power. And hence you hear a lot of things about how the total energy supply used in Bitcoin is increasing, and it's creating kind of power, wasteful power usages. Yep. And then if you have heard of HODL, I believe it's a misspelling, but it actually, some people say it stands for hold on for dear life, so it's a little bit of a joke. And sometimes it seems like it if you're following the price day to day. Just real quick, we're probably not going to go through the computer science of it, but essentially the transactions or things that change get stored and they get encrypted, and so that no one can actually see except for the people that have the private key to unlock it. So it's whoever's in the transaction, they can see it. These transactions are organized into blocks, and the blocks are chained one to the next one using the prior block's what's called a hash to prove that you are part of this chain. And you can see they chain together, and then there's an algorithm. The proof of work says which chain is the right one, because if everyone can provide blocks and chains into the system, the network decides which one. So you can see these are what's called the orphan blocks, right? They don't get added to the main chain. So all of the computer will just try to say, hey, what's the longest chain? That's probably the best version of the truth. And then they keep building on top of that. Other structures. So blockchain is actually, in the distributed ledger technology world, it's only one way to store or compute the data structure. There are others that are being worked on, and such as a tangle that you've heard. And a tangle is just using graphs versus a link. And so graphs, they have multiple points and cycles, and they go back and forth to each other. Another one structure is called a hash graph. The people working on it, they prefer not to be called blockchain, but you can say it's part of the same family of technology, but you can call it blockchain on steroids, so to speak. So it solves a lot of the transactional speed of validating and creating new blocks or new data onto the framework. We'll probably skip this, but just generally in the distributed ledger technology, there's several principles. Cryptography. There's also something that a lot of people with technology don't consider. There's governance, right? Because a lot of these projects are open source because it's peer-to-peer. And so a governance is how changes will happen. And in the early days, Bitcoin didn't have that. And so you'd have all these kind of revolutionary things where it was hinged upon one individual or a small group of individual programming. Now there's a process where you could have multiple families of people. In the Bitcoin world, it's called the improvement process. And if you've heard of ERC in the Ethereum, that's called the Ethereum request for comments system, right? Okay, so that's, as a result, there's right now kind of this new platform war, so to speak, in the whole blockchain world. There are many other platforms such as Ethereum, Chain, Stellar that are coming out to solve some of the problem with Bitcoin, but also create abilities for you to create applications beyond the kind of cryptocurrency space. And this is actually kind of similar to back when the OS wars back in the early days. I think where we're at right now is almost like DOS 1.0 or 2.0. You kind of have this new technology that promises to bring computing to everyone, but it's hard to use. I mean, you imagine DOS, you're writing a command, which is almost like a programming language. It wasn't until Windows 3.0 and Windows 3.3 that users and people come on and start to call that the operating system, but it really wasn't, right? It was just the graphical user interface, but it's been used as synonymous as the operating system itself, and what it did was just made computing a lot easier and more accessible for people. And so blockchain is kind of in that evolutionary phase itself, right? So right now, to kind of get onto blockchain, you actually have to know a lot, and to program, you have to be pretty experience with a lot of computational kind of theories and all that, but at some point, it's going to probably look like the operating system, right? Where you're going to get on and you use a decentralized application and benefit from all of its properties, such as privacy and security and all that transparently. So that's where we think it's going to go. So decentralized application brings about what the Web 3.0, and just the question is, are you ready for it, right? And what's going to look like? More freaking cats. There's one. There's another. And so every technology platform is made for creating cats. So this is the joke. Most of you haven't. The most famous or most widely known decentralized application built on the Ethereum framework is called Cryptokitties. It was more of an experiment, and it took off, and people were paying about $622 for these virtual goods and things like that. They're collected in the virtual collectible space, and it's definitely a very natural application. As the first one to build, it's cute, you can see. And Andreessen Horowitz just recently funded it to kind of grow this space, and obviously there's a lot more things you can do it as you create this technology. And that one got his head chopped off a little bit. And they're really adorable, right? So, okay, so more seriously, there's some more, there's social networking type of app called Steemit that's built on its own blockchain right now. And basically, if you want to participate in a node, you can actually run a Steemit node that will host this application, which essentially is pretty much like Facebook, right? And if you think about what's happening to Facebook with privacy and having Zuckerberg is the sole author of the truth, so to speak, and who gets to post, technology like these are getting more, I guess, relevant in terms of what they're doing. There's also Everpedia, is a version of Wikipedia that's being generated and is being built upon EOS, which is a kind of a third-generation blockchain system. And this project is picking up steam, and you can't not run into these guys anymore. So there's Receipt Coin, which is actually a smaller project that's kind of brewing, and the idea is to have the identity of things that you purchase. So imagine getting an app, and when you buy something, you can take a picture of it. It'll digitize it and put it on the blockchain, and it's a record. And if you resold that item, the next person can take that picture of that item, and it'll trace the ownership history of that. How's that important? It depends on how people are going to use it, but it's a novel application of decentralized, smart contract on Ethereum. There's in Pasadena, there's Oben. They have the identity and AI on that project. Most of you probably have seen them. And then our neighbor Alpha Token in Control Collective is creating a publishing type platform where you own your content and you can generate revenue off of it. They'll do a talk in the future, I think. They said they wanted to do that. Just a quick slide on the kind of where evolution of technology are. We're kind of in this frame of the DLT. And if you look or believe Gartner, they kind of say it's on the other side of the hype cycle. It feels to me more like it's on this side because there's still a lot of things to do. I mean, the third generation platforms are promising a lot of solutions to things like smart contract, faster transaction times, better programming model. A lot of those things aren't even out yet. I mean, they are out in what's called test mode. You can actually check it, but you really have to be great at programming and a number of other computing principles to run it. It'll probably take you 2 hours to figure out how to compile your code to run it. So it's still, I think, on the other side, but there is a lot of interest and adoption, and as you're kind of looking at how relevant this technology is for your business, you're probably coming in at the right time or early, so it's not actually too late. If you look at the Bitcoin price, you might think it is, but it's not so. I'll skip this one. This is actually kind of there's obviously people think there's a crypto or blockchain bubble coming up. This graph kind of shows what happens in prior stage and what happens right before the bubble. If you look at this gray line, that's the crypto blockchain space. It's compressed and grows so fast. We haven't seen anything like it before, right? So let's see here. Yeah, so I mean, back in the tech bubble that happened in the early 2000s, we thought it was the end, right? But the greatest brands in technology came out of it. You have Google, eBay, PayPal, which obviously spawn off lots of other kind of companies. So maybe a bubble in the crypto world is finally what's gonna let us see what's the next phase of this and where the future is gonna come. So I'll leave it to you to kind of think about in terms of what the bubbles or the things that are coming down in blockchain mean. Is it going to be more opportunity? Will we get a new internet that allow us to own our data better? Or maybe for now it's just a great way to pay for whiskey when you sell the tokens. Okay, discussions and QA. Awesome. Hopefully that was a good one.
Awesome presentation. Great overview of just also a brief history of blockchain, cryptocurrencies, current trends, and also potentially future trends. It's going to be really interesting to see how this actually plays out in the coming even months. There could be some really big changes, and also coming years as well. So we're going to open up to Q&A now. If you have a question, raise your hand. I know Michael Culhane does. Where's that man? Let's give the mic to him. He's great. He's great. He's actually done a presentation on blockchain in the past as well here. But John's going to walk around with the mic. If you have a question, again, raise your hand. But please save story time and comments for offline. Mr. Tran, will you be hanging out with us for a little bit? Okay. Sure. So if you'd like to share stories about how you've had like a Bitcoin debacle or something like that, and you want to just lament, then that's the time for it. But questions now.
Hi. Hello. So from someone who's not a computer programmer, and I have a question. Peer-to-peer has been around for a long time. So what was the evolution that that really started the blockchain? I'm not sure I understand the leap.
Yeah, that's correct. If you read the white paper for Bitcoin that appeared in 2009, there's really not any foundational technology that's invented in it. It's a very novel combination of what's already there. Public key cryptography, cryptography itself, hashing, which is a mathematical function that takes anything and gives you a number. And hash functions have their own families of algorithms where as you scale up or down, the principles are different. What made the leap is actually two things. One is that elegant combination of these technology in a way to solve a philosophical problem, I think, which is digital society and money. Money, in society for about 2,000 years has been one thing, which is government control. And so if you follow that, then you'll see the motivation. And then there's this mystery around this fellow Satoshi, and then there's all these characters that came about that try to do the early applications of this money, which is Silk Road, which essentially is the black market to sell all sorts of things. I believe there was a case where someone auctioned off a kill contract or whatever. So, so there's all sorts of that. You read about it. So, yeah. Well, all that's gone.
Hello.
I think.
I'm more of a finance person, not so much of a technologist, but I was kind of curious. Do you view Bitcoin or these cryptocurrencies as supplementing the fiat currencies for people who know what fiat currencies are, or replacing the fiat currencies? And also, do you feel like government controls society a lot of times through currency, Federal Reserve, yada yada? People know about that. Are you seeing any pressures from the government that trying to squash this whole development?
There's probably a bunch of things. I probably can't tell you the future because I'm not from the future on this stuff, and there's so many things that could change. What I've seen and what a lot of you may hear is the SEC is looking very closely. So in 2016 or so, there were thousands of ICOs. In fact, this month there aren't that many ICOs releasing. It's probably in the number of 30s, and a lot of them are refiguring out what their strategy is. And primarily it's because the SEC has been incrementally making their presence known, let's just say. I don't believe it's putting the foot down, because if they did, they would have actually shut it all down and arrested everyone, and I wouldn't be able to get up here and speak. Not because I'm arrested, it's just not that interesting, But they are making their presence known. They're defining the law better, and they're moving forward. I think the trick for them is how do they do what they're supposed to do, which is the government function is to create some form of order, irrespective of political beliefs about deep states and all that stuff. They're really trying to, I think, from at least what I see, is trying to keep order, keep up the speed, but also make some rules around this stuff in a way not to stifle innovation. Because especially in the United States, if we slow it down, well, Russia and everybody else are going to do it, and suddenly they created a new currency system that's more efficient, that allows society to function better, we would be behind, right? So I think government has to be very careful about how they're doing it, and you can watch it. In fact, about a month ago, the SEC and Congress had a really good video on YouTube. I'm happy to send it to you. You can listen for 2.5 hours about how they do it. And I'm very surprised that our lawmakers are so well versed in this, the way they talk about it. They don't know the technology, but the way they look at it, I think is pretty impressive to me. So. Yeah, yeah.
On the grid, but off the grid, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's only on the grid because even though it's anonymous, I mean, you could probably use some form of machine learning to figure out who's who for the most part. Not all of it, but, you know.
And I'm sorry, the last thing. So, is it replacing? Is Bitcoin intend to replace cryptocurrencies or supplement?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, let me just get this guy.
Oh, I repeat it. Oh, okay. The question, yes. The question is Bitcoin made to replace regular currency? Is that the question? I don't think it's intended to be. If you read the paper, it looks more like a philosophical dissertation, and you know the way it works with things in open source, it just moves on its own timeline, and everyone kind of hangs on. I mean, I have an opinion where it might go, but it's not going to necessarily go that way. I think fiat and government is always going to be part of money because society needs some form of order. Because if everybody thinks they're right, it'd be chaos, right? But Bitcoin, if you look at it in itself, in its own mission, it actually hasn't achieved it because what you have today with Bitcoin is you have these three large mining pool that actually control what happens. So, and it's a principle of this system, and you'll see it in other communities. And because these mining pool have so much power, it's actually appearing to be a little bit more centralized than its philosophical statement, right? So you.
I'm sorry, we'll get the next question over here.
It's possible because right now there's actually these things called stablecoin, and stablecoin is try to balance. You can't have a currency that just one day is $2,000 or $1,800 or whatever. It's, like if I quote you, some sort of product for $200, and then you woke up in the morning, it's now $800. So stablecoin is type of systems are looking at how to peg typically a fiat or something that doesn't change to a crypto, and you hopefully get the best of all worlds. Of course, it's a far cry from the philosophical principle of peer-to-peer decentralized, but I think it's a possible future of things where you get efficiency of payment, maybe lower transaction fee, higher volume of transaction. And then these technology have the ability to side chain, so you could actually still hook it to a Bitcoin, where the people that are, out in the wild, they can still do these speculative money system, but everyone else benefits from digital and efficiency. So that's what I think it is, but no one really knows. But stablecoin is the current, yeah.
Right here.
Yeah, we've heard about the immense energy use, especially for Bitcoin mining.
Yeah.
Like trends show it as using the entire nations of Netherlands energy next year or something.
Yep.
So is it sustainable to continue with Bitcoin, or are there other technologies that use far less energy, or are we banking on efficiency later? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so right now there are, it remains to be seen if they become the de facto or whatever, right? There's a slide on the platform wars. There's EOS, there's Cardano, there's a bunch of others, there's private chain. So not all blockchain consume that much energy. It just happens that this original, and working pretty well because other systems have other trade-offs too. Its principle is in order to maintain consistency, the consensus have to maintain proof, and to do that is to compete against each other on this cryptographic function. And it's not the best answer first, it's the first answers first. So essentially, the only way to do that is to compute faster, and to compute faster, you require more energy. So it's very inefficient. But there are other consensus algorithms that are coming out, things like proof of stake and all that. But it remains to be seen if they will be adopted. Bitcoin itself has attempted to change it, and Ethereum is about 18 months late in changing it, simply because once you launch this kind of technology, unlike a traditional database system where you made a mistake, you can actually go back in the transaction and change it. A lot of principles about blockchain is once you made a mistake, it's kind of almost have its own life because there's so many people that are involved. But there are solutions out there, and we'll probably move to it at some point, especially with the promise of decentralized application. So, I think as a participant, you can probably change it by selecting which app or how you use applications, and over the long period of time, it'll shift from something like Bitcoin to something that's more efficient in terms of energy use.
Over here.
Yes.
Over here. Next question's over here. We'll get the next question over here. Go ahead.
So if you look at blockchain, let's follow what happened with cloud, right? You had infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, and really people really like software as a service because it managed distributing in the cloud, redundancy, all of that for you. You mentioned the challenge in programming to blockchain. Do you see blockchain following that most people are going to want to just find someone that built the underlying infrastructure for the applications for them, or do you see enterprises actually wanting to be at like the infrastructure as a service level and build out themselves? Like, how do you see it mirroring the adoption of the cloud to simplify the adoption?
I think it's both that kind of happen because enterprises will want their own control of things, but as platforms itself, I mean, essentially Ethereum, if you look at it, it's like this one single worldwide computer that anyone can write a program in and not have to worry about wiring a motherboard or hooking up a network. So it's kind of there. It's just that the interface isn't there yet, but at some point it will be.
Well, I'm talking about take Bitcoin out of it. I'm talking, transportation, logistics, healthcare, other applications adopting it. Every day in the news you see another announcement about another industry getting into blockchain.
Yeah.
Walmart's getting into it. The whole blockchain transportation alliance. So do you see these people saying, "I'm going to figure out this myself," or are you going to find that they're going to be the Salesforce.com companies for the blockchain that are going to provide the platform?
Well, based on what I'm doing with my company, I'm hoping for the latter, which is they're looking for somebody to solve the problem. And so there's various opportunities for all sorts of business growth. I mean, you could create the next blockchain Amazon, or you could create the next Oracle off of your own blockchain. There's just so many different opportunities. And I think you're right. There are parallels in these things of consolidation and then more efficient distribution of function or power. So naturally, that means we're kind of here with DOS 1.0. What do we want to do for ourselves to be there? Do we want to wait and just put in a credit card and launch applications, or do we actually build infrastructure and all that? That's part of the reason it's so exciting, I think, for us.
Back here.
Yep.
So that's actually a good segue into my comment and question. We're doing exactly that. We're building a blockchain for the travel industry, and then participants can basically come in, and their contributions or their apps, if you like, all relate to the development of smart contracts. So the cleverer and the smarter and more niched you can get within an industry, you can actually find a whole range of apps that you could add value to effectively by building. So that's one application of that question. But to really comment on something I heard before, which is a little bit troubling about this whole presentation in a way, is I think we get into this problem of the tail wagging the dog, where the crypto becomes the story and the actual technology underlying blockchain and distributed ledger technology is kind of pushed aside. And the question about, is cryptocurrency an adjunct or an alternative to fiat currency is exactly that sort of rabbit hole. Really what it is for me, and I think for a lot of people working in this space, is that the technology around distributed ledger, smart contracts, it provides such an incredible new way of creating business models within a whole variety of different verticals, that the actual currency or crypto that you build on top of that serves a particular function within that space that fiat currency cannot do. And that is the whole reason why these spaces, I believe this space is exploding. Would you agree to that, or do you think that crypto itself is the reason why people are being drawn into this?
I actually agree a lot to what you're saying, and I think that's hence this talk. I actually own very little crypto, so don't kidnap me or anything. But if you look at it, all the technology foundation I believe there are more things that are going to come down the road that's going to be invented to make the distributed ledger technology be truly what it promises to be. But everything that's already created in this space is actually already created before. It's just combined in a way that's interesting. And for years, we've been trying to get people in technology has been trying to get people to secure their data better. So there's, public-private key infrastructure that will allow you to encrypt your message in transit. But it turns out people don't want to do it, and so they just trust Google Mail and they hit their button and it goes through. If it goes out of Google's purview, you don't know what servers in between are going to do with your email. They can read it, like they can promise to secure it and follow the RFC as much and do all the in-between proofs, but that's where it's at. And I think one thing to miss, and not to knock too much on cryptocurrency, is that it allowed people to be very interested in this space, whether they really understood it or not, and allowed us as technologists not to have to bridge that support or knowledge gap for them so that these apps will come out. And I believe it looks like as the technology improves better and better, you rely less on the actual, money aspect. I think it's just going to be there, kind of like the iPhone. You just use it. You don't really think about how revolutionary it is anymore. It's just a fact. And then you get these apps, and those apps will solve problems. Some of it the same problem, but better. And then there'll be other opportunities that come down. And then pretty soon you're using these decentralized application on these technology without even thinking about it. I think it seems like, do you think about, what happens when you move your mouse? Well, what is a mouse, right? Do you think about what happens when you move your fingertips on the surface? You don't anymore. It's all solved as part of the equation. So I think technology like this, for it to be really, reach its point, it'll be at the point where we're no longer talking about it. Of course, us geeks will always be talking about it, trying to figure out how to make it faster or bigger or solve different problems. But for everyone, at some point, it's just going to disperse, and you just get all these capabilities. So.
Good morning. I love the analogy of the operating systems. Maybe it's generational, but I think it's a clean analogy. I'm curious about use cases and at scale. And can you comment on industries or big name players that are making moves earlier that can just kind of comment on use cases and use industries?
As far as big players, they're very big players. IBM actually is behind a very public project called Hyperledger, which I believe they released to open source already. And I believe Oracle is behind them as well. JP Morgan itself has a fork of Ethereum for the enterprise. It's called Quorum. In terms of the blockchain industry or technology, a lot of the big players are in position. The question is how and who are going to implement them. We're still, I think, in the proof of concept stage of applications, but it's moved very quickly in terms of where these things are. And to be honest, like when it happens, it's going to be so transparent. You're going to open up a browser, you're going to fill out a mortgage lending application, you hit a save, and everything's done. Maybe you skip the whole step of filing it in a cabinet because it's no longer the best way to do it, because it will live on the blockchain, which is essentially a super cloud. You're not going to Amazon for one piece of document. The blockchain storage will be everywhere, right? That's at least kind of the promise, but yeah.
In one of your slides, there was an application that's using the blockchain. I think it was a social media application.
Yes.
Steepit, something like that.
Yeah.
So that type of application could be deployed on a single server, a cluster of servers, peer-to-peer, existing type of infrastructure. What's the business value of that business using the blockchain?
That's a good question. I don't think they raised money, and they don't think they have advertising to support it. It's completely user supported. So I believe the way it worked is they did an ICO, and the folks participating, they become part of the network, and they get the token value of transacting on those. So, and then as people come in, let's say you go to Steemit. In fact, I highly recommend getting an account on it. It's like getting Twitter back in 2004. Anyways, I highly recommend it. When you get an account, you start with 0 points, and as you do activities, you earn the tokens. But as you do activities, the people providing that infrastructure who runs a node, when they serve that content or move it around, they get a little bit of the value So the whole thing is self-representative. I don't know the connection between that and say, can you, if you earn enough Steam tokens, can you buy a Ferrari or a Lambo with it? Probably you could if you figure it out, but it's not, in the front. So it's not how, in terms of business value, you get to create this service without having to go through the traditional raising of funds, and the others, you don't sacrifice integrity of content to the media buys. Obviously with Facebook and things like that, that's in the presence, it's something that's going to be very relevant to society.
Over here.
So.
Some of the questions have already touched some of the facets of scalability. Can blockchain and Bitcoin and things of the sort still scale and stay decentralized? And you also just mentioned current players that are wanting to centralize. So are we going to centralize, not centralize? Can we scale without centralizing? So
Yeah. I mean, the beauty of it is like no one person gets to decide. I think as a society, we're going to decide by what we're going to use. So whether you're a programmer, as I said before, you could influence it by choosing what apps to use, right? But to answer your question, there's a technology component to it, which is, that can scale, right? There have been solutions to a lot of these problems that we hear about. But there's a governance or an adoption side of it where it's very different than Windows 3.0 to go to Windows 98. Microsoft just said, hey, we're not going to support it anymore, so spend your money if you want, or pirate it and we'll come after you, or you download Windows 10 or whatever, right? It doesn't work that way in this world because everyone have to agree. So I believe Bitcoin has been attempted to fork to solve some of these problems many times. There's a split between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Gold or something like that recently.
Bitcoin Cash?
Cash, yes. Yeah, and at the mining polls, they agree, and then at the last minute, for some reason, they didn't. And I believe it was cited as some sort of technology thing, and they're going to revisit, but it's not a straightforward answer. And it seems to be the solution for improving or moving forward is to leave the blockchain as is in its context and then build the next technology. So if you look at the people that developed EOS, Dan Larimer, he's actually one of the early Bitcoin developer, and he's on his 4th version of blockchain. And he hopes that one is the one that's going to stay because he's learning as he goes in the last half a decade of doing this. Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, the final part's exactly what I've been seeing from what I've been reading and talking to people about.
Yeah.
The next technologies will address it better.
Yeah.
In our support determines whether we use it.
Yep.
Awesome. So that's it for Q&A. If you didn't have a chance to get your question asked, he'll be around here, so please talk to him offline. Another round of applause for Mr. Tran.